Your mission is basically why you exist. And don't say, I exist to make money. Because we all know that as law firm owners, we expect to be paid for our work. There's nothing wrong with that. But we do know that oftentimes there is a why that we might have in our hearts as to why we chose certain things. There is oftentimes something much deeper than that as to why people ended up in the practice areas that they did, even when you started your own law firm, right? Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast. Where on today's episode, we are going to be talking about mission, vision, and values and why you need them in your law firm. So I want to give everybody just a little heads up. This episode is actually going to be a part of a series. We got a lot of really positive feedback from you guys on our series on non-attorney salespeople. So if you haven't already checked that out, you can check that out on the podcast in general, but also on our YouTube channel. So for those of you that are catching us here on YouTube, thank you for being here. We remind you to like and subscribe to the channel so you get updates as to when we are going to be posting content. Lots of information about LFM, about the information on the podcast, things that we have coming up as a company. In addition, for those of you that are out there in podcast world, if you're on Spotify or if you're on Apple, which we know are our two most popular platforms, still stay tuned because we have a lot coming up in the way of new content. So if you want to ever just tell me the things that are challenges for you, areas where you would like some support, information you'd like us to share with you here on the podcast, by all means, you can always reach out to us at info@lawfirmmentor.net. And where you find your podcast, you can also submit a form to tell us, hey, love this, would love to see more of that, etc. Because we are very responsive to our audience here. And that is actually the reason why we are covering today's topic. So without further ado, the reason why this topic came up, this actually came up from one of our clients. And then we started a conversation in our community and we found that it was actually an issue for quite a few people. So oftentimes we are very much in the task of running a law firm, right? In the day-to-day, we have to make a lot of decisions. We have to decide who to fire or whether or not we're going to coach someone in lieu of termination. We have to decide, are we going to promote someone or do we feel they need more skills and more training in order to earn that role? We have to decide how we are going to take in clients, what is going to be our process, and what types of clients are appropriate for the firm, right? And a lot of decision-making happens at the level of the now. Meaning something comes up, we decide we have to solve a problem and we need to solve for it right now. But so much of building a sustainable law firm, and not just sustainable in terms of you stay in business, but you sustain the growth in your business. So much of that actually happens when we as a group, as a collective, really dial down the how and the why of our company. And when we start speaking the same language and make a cultural idiom around how we want to be perceived, how we want to function day to day, how we want to treat each other, those decisions become a lot easier to accept, right? I think for those of you that have been following the podcast for any length of time, you know that one of the great sins that I have the least amount of respect for that humans engage in is gossip. I absolutely hate gossip. And one of the things that I have as a cultural component of my law firm is that we do not gossip. If you have something to say about another person, you man up, woman up, adult up, and say that to that person's face. Now, obviously, depending on the circumstances, there are times where that's not appropriate, right? So we have discrimination training and anti-discrimination, anti-harassment. Obviously, if that's the experience you're having, that needs to be addressed with management. But the basic hiccups of when you communicated X, it made me feel Y. I very much feel that should happen person to person, or you should not be talking about it because oftentimes we talk about it to others rather than to the person that we are talking to. So it's very much a toxic trait that can very easily erode culture, and I don't support it and will not tolerate it in my company. But once upon a time, I had very immature employees, and it was something that just kind of like proliferated. And I remember having to struggle with, okay, now that I punish this person, if it happens again, what do I do? And a lot of that, fear factor of, oh, it's so hard to find good talent. I have to just kind of, tough it out and see what I can take here. a lot of that came because we did not have a value system around gossip. But once we established a value system around how we treat each other, how everyone should expect to be treated in the company, how we move day to day, a lot of those sorts of behaviors became persona non grata. And the first time you put your foot down and there's a real consequence to someone, everyone learns about it and people start to adapt. And what you start to bring in over the course of time is not just people who respect the rule, but people who enforce the rule when you're not in the room, right? They say, "Hey, we don't do that here," right? Because they know it's not tolerated. Or if nothing else, even people who won't directly say something, you don't get a kind ear for it. You get a, "Okay, kind of busy right now. I'll talk to you later," right? When something like that happens. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, like this is just, a one-off example, right? There's a host of different things that fit into this category, but I wanted to bring this up because one of our clients is dealing with something very similar to this, and it happens to deal with the idea of blaming others in her company. And so what tends to happen in this particular law firm is when someone's called on the mat about some malfeasance, because there is a team approach and this is a larger firm, the firm has pods, if you will, of people that work together. There's almost always an instinct to point the finger that, well, it wasn't my job, right? Kind of the who's on first, what's on first, that kind of, pass the buck mindset. And we started asking some very definitive questions around, well, how are people taught to treat each other? And what we ultimately came to is that there is no operating system. And we've talked about this before. It is, you don't have a defined system, you have chaos. And chaos is a system, just not a very good one. So one of the things that we decided to really drill down with this particular client and then later into the community was talking about mission, vision, and values. And when we started asking directly, do you have a mission statement? Do you have a vision statement? Do you have your values codified in writing for your teams? The answers that we got were somewhat disheartening, but that presented a great opportunity to help this law firm owner to grow. And so we decided to bring it to the community at large. But ultimately, here is what is most important. Okay, we're going to talk about each of these. In this episode, we're going to outline what mission, vision, and values are, what each of them is. They are three distinct things, but they work in tandem with each other, and why you need them in your law firm. And then over the next 3 episodes, we're going to break them down one by one with a step-by-step formula as to how you can create them for your law firm so that you can ultimately create that cohesive message and make decisions a lot easier, a lot faster, with a lot more clarity. All right, so let's dive in. So the first one we're going to talk about is mission, okay? And your mission is basically why you exist. And don't say, "I exist to make money," because we all know that as law firm owners, we expect to be paid for our work. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But we do know that oftentimes there is a why that we might have in our hearts as to why we chose certain things. We've talked a lot on this podcast about Simon Sinek's, Start with Why, that book, and then his second iteration, which is Define Your Why. By the way, highly recommend both of those books, especially if you are uncertain about your why, because there are some people that say, I went to a law firm on day one and I was assigned to work in so-and-so's department and I liked it, so I stayed. But there is oftentimes something much deeper than that as to why people ended up in the practice areas that they did, even when you started your own law firm, right? Because nothing obligated you to remain in a certain practice area. If you were practicing, criminal defense at John Doe's law firm, nothing obligated you to continue to do that in your own law firm. And a lot of people will say, well, that's where I had clients. That's where I had a book of business. I needed to make money. And that's very true. But as you start to grow, nothing obligated you to stay in that area. In fact, you could have decided to market for other services and learn other areas. And people do that all the time. But oftentimes that opportunity is not something we see as viable for us directly because we have a mindset of lack. And that's a whole other money mindset conversation, which we have talked about on this show before. We're definitely going to get into it more deeply in upcoming episodes. But the why of your law firm has to connect with you as the owner, right? When we start out in solo practice, we're owner-centric. And there has to be, for the company, a why. There has to be a story, right? It's the purpose. It's the why behind the work that you do every day, right? And people really feel that when they go to a company. And you would be surprised how many people say, I just knew this was my law firm. A lot of times they can't even tell you why. But there is a reason why you were chosen over someone else and why someone else might have been chosen over you. And it often deals with the connection that the prospect feels with the entity. And the entity, the larger your company gets, will ultimately have a why of its own. But more often than not, it derives from the why of the founder. So in a profession that is oftentimes defined by client demands, we have lots of different expectations upon us, but there are some very specific reasons that you would have a mission statement. And here are some things that it accomplishes. So first, it allows for alignment, right? Every team member knows the ultimate purpose. Everybody knows we come to work to accomplish this goal. Immigration law firm, we come to work to help immigrants achieve the American dream, right? Family law firm, we come to work to help people through family crisis in integration of new family systems. Criminal defense, we come to work to stand up for everyone's right to have the state prove its claims against you before you are held to account for allegations made against you, right? We stand by reasonable doubt as the ultimate poll star that will protect the citizenry from malicious prosecution or whatever is on the other side of it for you, right? There's something that guides you, the North Star, right? And the mission also guides decision making, okay? So when we think about how we are going to elect to hire people, how we are going to choose our vendors and who we work with, how we are going to make decisions about who is going to elevate to the next level in their career in our company, how we are going to spend money, what are the things that guide those decisions, the mission is always the undercurrent of the decision making, right? Especially when you have competing priorities. And then finally, you also want to think about improving client attraction and retention, right? So when you have a purpose, we are here to help secure family unity or help people through family crisis. When you realize that you have a client that might actually be creating family crisis, that might not be a client for you, right? So the decision to terminate someone becomes a lot easier when you have that mission that says, we stand for this, we exist for this reason, okay? So just think about it as your statement as to your why, right? We are here for this goal. Now, vision is often something that people will mistake for mission. When I ask people, do you have a vision statement? They will often say, we exist to help people to do X. And I'm like, no, that's your mission. That's your why. Your vision is the picture, okay? It's where you are going. And a lot of people are fearful of creating a vision because their minds change, especially when you're in rapid growth mode, right? One of our clients who's in our mastermind, she's at a rate now of 46% growth over last year, and her profit margin is 23.6% growth over last year. So she is just killing it, right? She's thrilled. Now, she has a very, very definitive why of her firm. This is an estate planning firm. Very, very definitive why of her firm. She loves what she does. You can tell it when she talks about it. There's a powerful energy that enters the room when that discussion takes place. But if I were to ask her, like, what is your vision? The vision is not just, we want to make X dollars next year, right? That's a part of the vision, right? Profit and your financial security and what your firm can produce for you and for the people that work for you and for the people that are attached to your firm, the people that are helped by your firm, all of that is a part of it. But really what you are doing is you are creating an image in the future that is going to propel you going forward. So your vision, when you think about it as the roadmap to where you're going, it starts with a picture, right? And if I were to just ask you right now to close your eyes and visualize what you want your law firm to be in the future, most people would start with some demographics, right? I want it to employ X number of attorneys, Y number of support staff. Here's where I want it to be located, right? Geography. Here's who I want it to serve, our client base, right? So those are some very definitive things. But vision goes far beyond that. It goes into how you want to feel when you come to work every day. It goes to what words would be synonymous with your company if you were to have another person outline for you what they think of when they hear your company name. So think about that and think about it as a future state, right? It is your North Star. This is the thing that we're working toward. This is the thing that we are angling for every day when we come to work and we're making decisions, but more importantly, when we're showing up and how we're showing up, it's very much guided by that, right? So a strong vision is going to accomplish some very basic things. First, it's going to provide direction and motivation, right? Your vision needs to be a powerful, evocative description of where you are headed, and the why, your mission, is baked into that, right? So if I say, in 5 years from now, we are going to be the leading firm in this region offering this service for the purpose of helping people to accomplish this objective, that certainly tells me a little bit about what we're doing. Like it gets to the underbelly, the mission, but it doesn't tell me what people are going to think of as the powerhouse, right? Or the calm in the storm, right? Think about it like from those terms, right? What are the feelings that you want to evoke with the descriptions that you put to your vision? Now, of course, as I said before, this is a series. We're actually going to go through the step-by-step as to the how of creating it in a later episode. But for now, I just want you to think about, if you close your eyes and visualize your law firm, what does it look like, right? And if it doesn't excite you, you're probably not going to be as motivated to get through some of the challenging times of running a law firm. Think about that from a team member's perspective, right? If you're not motivated by your law firm, what do you think your team members are going to feel? They also need to have motivation when they come to work. They also need to have a reason to get up in the morning. They also need to have a reason to deal with the angry clients who are unreasonable, and the court system that is holding you to ridiculous standards in terms of schedules, and the administrative inefficiency that comes and seeps in as we start to have rapid growth, right? If we're not highly systematized. Wink and nod to crushing chaos, right? So the direction and motivation, definitely a key piece of this. Also in the vision piece, we have to think about strategic filter, okay? So this is when we are making decisions. We said before, decision making is really guided by our mission. However, the vision, if we think about where we are right now and where we're headed, we very much have to think about when we have to strategically decide, because oftentimes, especially in growth companies, you need a lot of things all at once, right? Rome was not built in a day. So if I told you, go out and hire every person that you needed, you'd probably say, I'll run out of money before we get there, right? Because even if these people are profitized, if you have profitized the role, right? Something we very much promote here at Law Firm Mentor, we don't just hire people. We decide how they're going to make money for us and how we're going to be profitable with them in engineering their role and before we hire them. But let's assume that if I just kind of deviated, we ran off course for a minute and I said, go hire somebody. You go hire all the people you need. You would probably say we need more than we can afford, right? Especially when you are a smaller company. So you have to filter. You have to say, who do we need first? What is going to move the needle the fastest, the farthest? What area is going to be most improved, right? There are times where we focus on systems issues, right? We focus on getting people in who are going to help us crush that chaos, help us get to a place where we're more efficient, help us improve our culture. And then there are other times where it's all about the money, right? We need leads. We need sales. We need to get that part of the business moving so that we can make money, so we can stay in business, so that we can grow the business, etc. And sometimes we have to decide either or. Now, more often than not, I tell people, if it's too chaotic, you can't make money because every dollar you put in, 80 cents of it goes back out again, right? So sometimes you do have to tough it out for a moment and not grow in order to, solidify your foundation. But those are strategic decisions, right? Your vision is going to help you with that. Because while most founders are focused on, I got to run as hard as I can toward growth, that oftentimes means marketing and sales, you do have to decide, okay, if the wheels are coming off the bus such that every dollar I put in is going to seep back out by large measure, if I don't get my stuff together, you might have to decide right now, we need to press pause on growing and just allow ourselves to be. And there are times where you make decisions to do that because you want more quality than you want quantity. Case in point, when I started Law Firm Mentor, it was 2018, January 1st, 2018 is technically our birth date. And I just kind of went out there and I said, I'm not going to be focused on growing. I'm going to grow because I'm going to, pursue it as a business, but I'm not going to be focused on creating a marketing campaign, creating a funnel, getting as many people as I can, getting as many leads as I can. I literally decided, let me put it out there, let people know I'm available, and see what I feel they need when I speak to them. So I had a whole bunch of different coaching packages when I first started, right? There was, I think you need the benefit of an incubator. So I'm going to create a small group and I will invite select people that I think work with you, and I will guide all of you so you have each other. And other people, I was like, a lot of your stuff is some deep stuff. We really got to talk about that deep stuff. And you're probably not going to be inclined to do that with others. So we need some one-to-one. And then when we got to a certain level and had a certain volume of people, I was like, you know what? I think people benefit from all of that. So I'm going to actually create a cohesive program and sell that, right? But in the course of doing that, I remember along came COVID, right? And March of 2020, just like every other law firm owner, I was told the world is shutting down. I was told it was 2 weeks. We all were told it was 2 weeks. It was not 2 weeks, but that's another story, right? So we are pressing pause on life, but business was still happening, right? People were still selling, and law firms were still able to sustain themselves because people still needed legal representation. They might not have been physically going into a courthouse at that time, but they still needed legal services. But I knew that if I approached this as come over here and buy my coaching service while lawyers were in distress, there would be some people that would still buy. In fact, many coaches I know actually grew their companies during that time period because they were focused on growing, and they created a message of, oh my God, it's so scary. Let's all be afraid and come hire me so that you don't have to be afraid anymore. But I just felt there was something wrong with that. That felt exploitative. That felt like it was the wrong decision. And I said, you know what? We're going to just be here for each other in our profession. I'm just going to make a strategic decision that we're not going to sell right now. We're just going to serve right now. And I went live just about every day for months and just gave away strategies on how to survive, right? I partnered with an accountant so we could give out information on the PPP loans and talk about the CARES Act and all of the provisions and the tax implications and all the things that people needed to know. And that was a decision about where I was going. And that meant right now is not the time to make money. Right now is the time to figure out what I stand for, figure out how I want to help people, let people know how I want to help them. And that was a strategic decision that was guided by my vision, right? So if you don't allow yourself to have a vision, if you don't create the picture of what you want your company to look like, you can oftentimes make a shit ton of money in the meantime, right? This is not me telling you that you're going to make the most money by having the best vision. You might. But what's most important is that the thing that will keep your business in business and sustainably growing over the long haul is actually deciding what you want it to be and what you want it to look like. If you don't, you can create a whole lot of stuff that you then have to spend your time and your energy and your money undoing in order to redo it faster and better in the future. And that wastes a lot of time and money and, frankly, a lot of energy that most people don't invest. And so what ends up happening is you get frustrated with the thing that you created and you just kind of check out, right? Oh, I got this law firm. It's making enough money. I'm fine. Even though you're not fulfilled because you aren't growing what your mission was to do, right? All right. Last thing about vision before we move on to values is it creates emotional buy-in. And this is really the stickiness of employee retention and client retention, right? And to a certain degree, even founder retention, right? The founders that exit companies more often than not are doing so because they're just not connected to what they do anymore. Like, I've outgrown that. And so your goal in having a vision, the pretty picture that's kind of off on the horizon, is to keep you emotionally tethered to what it is that you're doing. And the more you do that with other people and enroll other people in your vision, right? That's vision casting. We talk about that as a leadership core. The more you do that, the more you get people who want to stick around. Now, people don't just universally stick around because you have a great vision. There are some people that your vision is not their vision, and that's okay. They're not your people anymore. And many times there are people that don't allow themselves to see a vision, no matter how great you are at vision casting, because they are somebody who is not clear about who they are and what they want for their own lives, right? You can't necessarily correct for that other than a whole lot of therapy that you're not going to be providing to your employees, right? But you can do a much better job of solidifying a really strong culture around your vision if you create one. Okay. Third critical area of your company and your company landscape. We've talked about your mission. We've talked about your vision. Now let's talk about your values. Now, this is one of these warm and fuzzy things that a whole lot of people say, yeah, people here know what we stand for. And I'll be candid with you. I was one of these people. Okay. I remember, shout out to one of my former business coaches, Ivy Slater. And Ivy was a coach, an executive coach that I hired for my law firm. And we worked together for many years. And now we are very good friends. But Ivy introduced me to a professional who does an assessment called the Core Values Index, and the CVI for short. And I thought it was interesting. I'm kind of an assessment junkie. We'll have a whole other episode about assessments one day in the future. But I'm kind of an assessment junkie, and I thought that one was interesting in terms of how it was structured. And it was really about the core competencies of the team members and how people are oriented to think in their respective roles. And it really, it was illuminating to see how well people fit their roles and sometimes how well people do not fit their roles. But what I thought was interesting is we were asked the question, and by this time, LFM was in my mind and in my heart, but not yet in existence. And we were asked the question by this professional if we had values. And I said, well, of course we have values. Everybody soon shows up to work, and how they show up and how they treat people and how they act are their values. And she agreed with me, but she said, does everybody here know what the collective values of the company are? And I said, I guess. So she said, well, we're going to go through a little exercise that's going to ferret that. Now, I will say I was proud of myself. We actually did have 96% agreement on what the firm values were, right? And a lot of it were the things that people had come to learn were things that would get me really excited and really happy, and the things that would really piss me off, right? So, just kind of in a snapshot, we kind of had done this, but not quite in the formulaic structured way that she had walked us through, where my team was asked, what are the things that will get you promoted in this company? And they were able to identify them, right? And it was more than just, you show up, you do your job, you go home. It was very much about tenacity. It was about dedication. It was about taking care of clients. And there was also a thread of what will get you disciplined at this company. And it was, very much about not owning when you make a mistake, not acknowledging it and bringing it to someone's attention so it can be fixed. And the thing that everyone agreed on would get you terminated is lying to me under any circumstance about something that you have done or failed to do in this company, right? Not just a no-no. That's something that violates me in a host of different ways. Shout out to my therapist. But my team was able to identify that. But oftentimes that is much easier when you are smaller, right? So when you have a core group, I think at that time we were probably 15, 20 people, right? When you have a smaller group, it's very easy for people to, by osmosis, pick up on the culture. And especially if they're working very close with a powerful figure. So if you as the founder are always out engaging and doing and acting with your team, they get it. As you grow, it starts to transmute a little bit, and it becomes the mission, vision, and values of whoever is speaking at the time, some of which overlap yours and some of which don't. So if you don't hire people and lead people in a way that your message filters to the people at the top so it can filter down, what tends to happen is it becomes attenuated over time. So you have to think about the values as the behavioral code of the firm, okay? This is to define how you pursue the vision and the mission and, who you are while you are doing so. So your values are going to anchor the firm culture, right? When you think about the culture of a firm, you think about descriptions of how we treat each other, how we treat our clients, how we treat our work, how we pursue our careers, right? You can have some people who are careerists that spend their days every day thinking, I'm going to set the world on fire. And you can have other people who are, I have a career by virtue of being in my profession. I want to do a good job, but I can let it germinate over time. That is okay, right? Nobody has to define their firm as we only achieve people that want to, be shooting stars, because frankly, if everyone is shooting, at some point, there's no room, there's no sustainability, right? There are some people that are building, you need people that are sustaining. That's a whole other discussion. But you can say we all pursue our career with a certain level of professionalism, with a certain level of dedication, right? And your values are going to help you to set behavioral expectations, right? This goes back to that discussion that we had about gossip. And, we have a zero tolerance policy in my law firm for gossip, but it can be any number of things. You could have a zero tolerance policy in your law firm about tardiness, or, about lack of clarity, or about, communications, right? I know some firms that don't really have a rule around when they're going to return phone calls or emails, and that has created problems for them. Maybe you have a zero tolerance policy on getting back to a client within a specified time period, or even just telling them what that time period is. In this stage of my life right now, I have 2 separate lawyers for different parts of my life. Actually, 3 separate lawyers for different parts of my life. As a business person, I have a lot of stuff going on, right? And one of my lawyers is incredibly capable, but also incredibly bad about communication. So I will send an email, and now I have learned how to manage my lawyer by saying, I'm going to expect a response to this email. I'll send it on a Monday. I'm going to expect an email reply by Friday of this week. Please reply immediately, or have your team reply immediately if Friday of this week does not work for you to get back to me. And since I've been doing that, that works well. But frankly, I shouldn't have to. Right? They should be telling me when they're going to get back to me. I shouldn't have to manage that part of the relationship. And I feel that. I feel the annoyance of that when I have to engage. And as a client, being on the other side of the lawyer experience, now I'm very certain that I brought this to my teams, my law firms, knowledge, and said, hey, we've got to make sure we course correct around this, that we don't have this be the experience that our clients have. Okay. And then, of course, your values will guide your decisions. Now, your mission is ultimately, we make decisions through the lens of our mission. But your values are going to be ultimately the litmus test, right? Because there's always going to be lots of different possibilities on the table. And when you're trying to make a decision, you might say the best strategic decision is X, but that isn't necessarily true to who we are. You might say what we always stand for is being fair to people. So while we could sell this particular prospect, it wouldn't be fair to them to do so because it would violate one of our values. And then we're not in alignment with who we are alleging that we are in the world, right? We're not showing up as our best self, right? So there are some very basic ones. I'm sure you all have heard these before, but, some law firm values that many people will describe are, integrity and ownership, compassion, growth, excellence, right? Every value that you have should be backed by action statements, right? We tell the truth even when it hurts, right? Even when it costs us money. We own the outcomes, not excuses, right? We take responsibility for what we've done right, and we own when we have done something right and when we have done something not so right. Okay, so that in a nutshell is your mission, your vision, and your values, okay? And we're going to be in a separate episode for each of these, going to be going through the step-by-step process as to how to create these in your law firm so you can get to that point of cohesion, clarity, and simplicity. Now, that doesn't mean that as soon as you have them, everything becomes easier, but everything becomes easy, but it does become easier. It does become something that you become rooted in. You don't revisit them because you know that they fit the mission, the vision, and the values. All right, everyone. I'm Allison Williams, the host of the Crushing Chaos with Law for Mentor podcast, and I will see you on our next episode.